On a quiet stretch of land where the horizon seemed endless and the wind carried stories older than memory, a cowboy rode along the edge of his property, expecting nothing more than another ordinary day. His life had been built on routine, discipline, and the unspoken understanding that this land was his responsibility. Every fence post, every trail, every inch of soil had been earned through years of hard work. So when he noticed a woman kneeling among the bushes, carefully gathering berries, it immediately broke that sense of order. He approached her with suspicion, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. In his world, strangers rarely appeared without reason, and even more rarely without consequence. The land wasn't just land to him, it was his livelihood, his history, and his identity. As he dismounted and walked toward her, he expected excuses, maybe fear, or even defiance. Instead, he found calm. The woman didn't run. She didn't look startled. She simply continued picking as if she belonged there just as much as the trees and the wind. When he finally spoke, his voice carried authority, asking her what she thought she was doing on private property. It was a question rooted in ownership and boundaries and the belief that some lines should not be crossed. Her response, however, shifted everything. She looked up at him, not with fear, not with apology, but with a quiet clarity. It said that the land might be his on paper, but the berries were not planted by him, nor grown by him. They came from the earth itself, freely, without asking permission. She explained that she wasn't there to take anything that wasn't needed. She was gathering just enough to survive, just enough to carry her through another day. Those words struck deeper than he expected. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. There was no anger, no challenge, only truth. And in that moment, the cowboy was forced to confront something he had never really questioned before. Ownership had always been clear to him, defined by fences and documents. But her words introduced a different perspective, one that blurred those lines. He began to see the land differently. Not just as something he possessed, but as something he was part of. The berries didn't recognize boundaries. The wind didn't stop at fences. Nature itself operated on a system far older and far more balanced than any human claim. And here was this woman, living in quiet harmony with that system, taking only what she needed, leaving no harm behind. As the silence stretched between them, something shifted inside him. The tension that had brought him there began to dissolve. He realized that this encounter wasn't about trespassing at all. It was about understanding, about recognizing that survival, dignity, and respect for the land could exist outside the rules he had always followed. He asked her how long she had been doing this, and she told him her story of hardship, of losing stability, of finding her way back to simplicity. She spoke about learning to rely on the land, not to exploit it, but to coexist with it. Every berry she picked was part of a balance she respected deeply. By the time she finished, the cowboy no longer saw her as an intruder. He saw her as someone who understood something he had overlooked. His land, his pride, his sense of control, they were still important, but they were no longer absolute. Instead of asking her to leave, he stepped back. He told her she could stay, not as permission granted by authority, but as acknowledgement of something shared. The land wasn't diminished by her presence. If anything, it was honored by the way she treated it. That moment stayed with him long after she left. It changed the way he rode across his property, the way he looked at the fields, the way he thought about ownership and responsibility. He began to realize that true stewardship wasn't about control, it was about care. The cowboy's discovery of the woman gathering berries on his property begins as an ordinary moment that quickly turns into something unexpected and unsettling for him. He is a man who lives by routine and familiarity, someone who understands every corner of his land and expects it to remain unchanged unless he is the one who changes it. His days are shaped by the predictable rhythm of ranch life, where the movement of cattle, the condition of fences, and the weather are the main concerns that occupy his attention. So when he rides along the edge of his property and notices something unusual, it immediately disrupts the mental order he relies on. At first, he does not fully understand what he is seeing. From a distance, the figure appears small against the wide landscape, almost blending into the natural surroundings of bushes and dry grass. But as he moves closer, he realizes it is a woman, crouched down carefully among the wild berry bushes. She is not rushing or hiding. Instead, she is moving slowly and deliberately as if she has done this many times before and feels no sense of urgency or fear. This alone makes the situation strange to him, because most people who realize they are on private land tend to leave quickly or at least show signs of concern. The cowboy's first reaction is suspicion. In his mind, the land is clearly marked, clearly understood, and clearly his responsibility. He knows where his property begins and ends, and he takes pride in maintaining those boundaries. To see someone inside that space without permission immediately triggers questions in his mind. He wonders who she is, how she got there, and whether she knows she is trespassing. His instinct is not anger yet, but a guarded alertness that comes from years of protecting what he owns. As he continues to approach, he begins to observe more details. The woman is not acting like someone who is lost or confused. She is focused on what she is doing, gently picking berries and placing them into a small container or cloth. Her movements are careful, almost respectful toward the plants around her. She does not appear to be damaging anything or taking more than she needs. Still, none of this changes the fact that she is on his land, and that fact alone carries weight in his mind. He dismounts or slows his horse depending on the version of the scene and steps closer with a firm posture. His presence is meant to signal authority even before he speaks. He expects her to notice him immediately and react with surprise or concern. But what unsettles him slightly is that she does not react at first. She continues what she is doing for a brief moment longer, as if finishing a thought or completing a small task before acknowledging him. When she finally looks up, their eyes meet, and the situation becomes fully real. The cowboy is no longer observing from a distance. He is now directly part of the moment. The land that usually feels silent and controlled now feels uncertain because of this unexpected human presence. He prepares himself to question her, to assert his position, and to reestablish the boundaries that he believes have been crossed. When the cowboy finally confronts the woman, what he expects and what he receives are completely different, and this difference becomes the turning point of the entire encounter. In his mind, he has already prepared a familiar pattern of response. He assumes she will be startled, perhaps defensive, or at the very least apologetic. From his experience, people who are caught on private land usually react with nervous explanations, quick excuses, or immediate attempts to leave. This expectation is rooted in his understanding of authority and boundaries, where ownership naturally demands compliance. However, the woman does not respond in any of those expected ways. Instead of showing fear or urgency, she remains calm. Her body language does not suggest panic, nor does she appear threatened by his presence. She does not rush to gather her things or try to escape the situation. This calmness is the first thing that disrupts the cowboy's assumptions. It forces him to pause internally, even if he does not immediately show it outwardly. When she finally speaks, her tone is steady and composed. She does not raise her voice, nor does she lower it in submission. There is no hesitation in her words, and this creates an immediate contrast with what the cowboy is used to. Her calm explanation is not an apology, nor is it an excuse. Instead, it is simply a statement of understanding about what she is doing and why she is doing it. She acknowledges her presence in a straightforward manner, as if she sees no reason to justify herself beyond the truth of her situation. This reaction unsettles him more than resistance would have. If she had been afraid, he would have known how to respond. If she had been argumentative, he would have known how to assert his authority. A calmness removes the emotional triggers he is prepared for. It places him in a position where he must listen rather than react, even if he is not fully ready to do so. As she continues speaking, she explains that she is gathering berries not out of disrespect or ignorance, but out of necessity. Her words are simple, yet they carry weight because they are delivered without emotion designed to persuade or manipulate. She is not trying to win an argument. She is simply describing her reality. This honesty makes it harder for the cowboy to dismiss her as just another trespasser acting carelessly. The woman's demeanor also reflects a deeper kind of confidence, not one based on authority or ownership, but on experience with survival and self-reliance. She appears to understand the land in a different way than he does. While he sees boundaries, she sees resources. While he sees ownership, she sees opportunity provided by nature itself. This difference is not spoken directly, but it is implied in the way she behaves and speaks. The cowboy, on the other hand, is still processing the gap between expectation and reality. He is listening, but internally he is adjusting his understanding of the situation. The calmness in her voice makes it difficult for him to categorize her as a simple intruder. Instead, she begins to appear as someone who belongs to a different way of life, one that does not align with his rules but still exists with its own logic. This moment is important because it shifts the power dynamic of the encounter without any force or confrontation. The cowboy who came prepared to assert control is instead placed in a position where he must observe and interpret rather than command. The woman's calm explanation does not challenge him directly, but it quietly challenges the assumptions he brought with him. The third point becomes the heart of the entire encounter because it is where the woman's perspective directly challenges the cowboy's understanding of ownership and boundaries. After establishing her calm presence and explaining her actions, she moves into a deeper idea that reshapes how the cowboy interprets what is happening on his land. Instead of focusing on permission or trespassing, she shifts the conversation toward nature itself and how it functions independently of human control. She gently points out that the berries she is gathering were not created by him, planted by him, or maintained by him in a controlled way. They are part of the natural world, growing freely from the earth without any human authority deciding their existence. This idea introduces a distinction that the cowboy has rarely, if ever, considered in his daily life. For him, land is divided, marked, and owned. Everything on it falls under responsibility and control. But she presents a different interpretation, one where nature does not recognize fences, property lines, or legal ownership. Her words are not spoken as a challenge, but they naturally question the structure of thinking he has always relied on. She is not saying he has no right to his land in a legal or practical sense. Instead, she is drawing attention to something deeper, the idea that the living things on the land operate according to their own rules. The berries grow because of sunlight, soil, rain, and time, not because of any human decision. In her view, nature is generous but not owned, shared but not controlled. The cowboy listens, and for the first time, he begins to separate the concept of land from the concept of life growing on it. This is not something he has had to think about before. His role has always been to manage, protect, and maintain what is his. But her perspective introduces a subtle shift, suggesting that his control may apply to boundaries and structures, but not necessarily to the natural processes happening within them. She continues by emphasizing that she is not taking more than she needs. This detail is important because it reinforces her respect for balance. She is not harvesting in excess or damaging the plants. She is gathering carefully, almost as if she understands an unwritten agreement between herself and the environment. This approach contrasts with the cowboy's expectation of intrusion, where presence alone is often seen as a violation. Instead, she frames her actions as part of a relationship with nature rather than an act against ownership. Her reasoning also reflects a survival mindset shaped by necessity rather than convenience. She is not there for profit, exploitation, or disregard of rules. She is there because the land in its natural state offers something that sustains her. In her worldview, taking berries is not theft, but participation in what nature provides. This idea does not erase the cowboy's sense of ownership, but it complicates it in a way he cannot easily dismiss. What makes her explanation powerful is its simplicity. She does not use complex arguments or emotional persuasion. She speaks as if what she is saying is obvious, something that exists whether or not people acknowledge it. This quiet certainty forces the cowboy to confront a gap in his understanding. He begins to see that ownership and natural abundance are not always aligned in the way he assumed. The fourth point captures the internal turning moment for the cowboy, where the conversation stops being about confronting a stranger and starts becoming a quiet challenge to everything he has believed about land, ownership, and responsibility. After hearing the woman's calm explanation and her perspective on nature, he is left in a state of reflection that he did not expect when he first rode out. Nothing in his day had prepared him for a philosophical shift while checking his property boundaries, yet that is exactly what begins to unfold inside him. At first, he tries to hold on to his original mindset. He reminds himself that the land is legally his, that boundaries exist for a reason, and that allowing unchecked access could lead to disorder. This is the practical side of his thinking, the part shaped by years of experience managing livestock, preventing theft, and maintaining control over what he has built. For him, ownership is not just a concept, but a necessity for survival and stability. Without it, everything he has worked for would feel uncertain. But despite this internal reasoning, the woman's words do not leave his mind. They begin to sit alongside his beliefs rather than being pushed away by them. He replays what she said about the berries not being planted or created by him, and about nature operating independently of human ownership. These ideas begin to create small cracks in the certainty he once held so firmly. It is not that he suddenly agrees with her completely, but rather that he cannot ignore the truth embedded in her perspective. As he looks around at the landscape he has always considered his domain, something changes in how he sees it. The land is still familiar, still structured by fences and paths, but now it also appears different. He starts noticing things he usually overlooks: the way the wind moves through the grass, how the berries grow in clusters without human care, how wildlife moves freely regardless of property lines. These observations make him realize that the land has always been functioning on its own terms, even while he has been managing it. This realization creates a subtle emotional tension within him. On one side is his identity as an owner and protector, someone responsible for maintaining order. On the other side is the emerging awareness that nature does not fully belong to anyone. He begins to feel that his role might not be as absolute as he once believed. Instead of being a controller of land, he might be more of a caretaker within a larger system that existed long before him and will continue long after. The woman's calm presence reinforces this shift. She does not argue further or try to convince him. She simply exists within the space, acting in harmony with the environment rather than in opposition to it. Her behavior becomes a living example of the philosophy she expressed, showing that it is possible to interact with nature without asserting dominance over it. This contrast deepens the cowboy's reflection because he sees that her approach is not theoretical but practical. As he stands there, the silence between them becomes meaningful. It is no longer uncomfortable or tense, but filled with thought. He begins to question whether his understanding of ownership has been too narrow, focused only on control and protection rather than coexistence and respect. This does not mean he rejects his responsibilities, but it introduces a new layer of awareness that complicates his previous certainty. The most significant change happening inside him is not agreement with the woman, but openness to reconsideration. He is no longer reacting only as an authority figure. He is also thinking as someone who is learning something unexpected. That shift is subtle but powerful because it marks the beginning of doubt in a belief system that has guided him for years. The fifth point represents the resolution of the encounter, where the cowboy's internal shift finally translates into an outward action that changes the tone of the entire situation. After the tension, explanation, and reflection, there comes a moment where he must decide what kind of person he is going to be in response to what he has just experienced. This is not just about the woman anymore. It is about how he chooses to define his relationship with his land and the people who might come into contact with it in unexpected ways. At the beginning of this moment, the cowboy still carries the weight of his role as the landowner. His instincts are shaped by responsibility, and part of that responsibility traditionally involves protecting boundaries and removing anyone who is not supposed to be there. Under normal circumstances, he would have insisted that the woman leave immediately, reinforcing the idea that private property must remain under strict control. That would have been the simplest and most predictable outcome. However, what has changed is his perception. The conversation has already softened his initial reaction, and the reflection that followed has created a space in his mind where rigid certainty no longer feels absolute. He now sees the situation not as a clear violation, but as a more complex interaction between human need and natural abundance. This does not erase the fact that she is on his property, but it changes how he interprets her presence. As he looks at the woman again, he no longer sees just an intruder. He sees someone who is living in a way that is closely tied to survival and respect for the environment. Her calmness, her restraint in gathering only what she needs, and her understanding of nature's generosity all contribute to this new perception. The anger or authority he initially felt has been replaced by a quieter sense of understanding. This is where his decision becomes significant. Instead of asserting control in the way he originally intended, he chooses to respond with restraint. He does not rush her, threaten her, or demand immediate removal. Instead, he speaks in a calmer tone, acknowledging the situation with a level of respect that was not present at the beginning. This change in behavior reflects the internal transformation that has taken place within him during the encounter. In some interpretations of the story, he even allows her to continue gathering berries, recognizing that her actions are not harmful or destructive. This decision is not based on legal obligation, but on personal judgment shaped by what he has just learned. He begins to understand that strict enforcement of boundaries is not always the only way to maintain order or respect on the land. What makes this moment important is that it represents a shift from authority to awareness. The cowboy does not lose his identity as a landowner, but he expands. He starts to see himself less as someone who controls everything on the land and more as someone who shares space with natural processes and, occasionally, with people who interact with those processes differently than he does. After the woman leaves, the impact of the encounter does not end. The cowboy is left with lingering thoughts that continue to influence how he views his surroundings. The land he once saw as purely his responsibility now feels more connected to a larger system of life that operates beyond ownership. He begins to think more carefully about balance, respect, and the limits of control.